All right, good evening, folks, and welcome to the July edition of the Astroimaging Special Interest Group. Um, I'd like to ask if we have any folks who this is their first time on the meeting. If you'd like to introduce yourself, you don't have to, but please feel free to do so if this is your first meeting.
I think they should have to.
Some people just like to lurk. Okay. Also, at the beginning of the meeting, we call this our beginner's corner. And this is for anyone who has a question that they think is a beginner's question. They can ask it and possibly get some useful information from the more seasoned imagers online here. So anybody have any beginner questions that they want to throw out to start us off? No beginners questions.
So I'll ask one. I'm Jim Nepler. This is actually my second time I've been on, but I'm just starting off in this hobby. It's fascinating. How important are doing darks and flats? And is that an absolute must, or for people who've been doing this a long time?
Yes and
Would you?
yes. Darks are important, flats are even probably more important. Some of the newer cameras, some of the newer CMOS sensors are so low noise that you can many times get away without darks. But for the most part, you'll probably need flats to compensate for any irregularities in the optical train. Typically, that means any little bits of dust that might be on the window of the camera or on a filter if you're using filters. Those things tend to show up in your final image unless you somehow calibrate them out. So anybody else want to pitch in on that?
I agree with Greg. Flats are going to be more important because the absence of flats, if a defect is there, will be visible. You'll have a bright donut in the middle of the picture, and there's really no other way to get rid of those artifacts. There was a guy, if you looked at Quiv, the Lazy Geek on YouTube, he makes the argument that you don't need darks with modern cameras that don't have any amp glow, like the 2600, 6200, because their dark current is so very low that you can just get rid of it with a bias frame. Now, others have explained that as a technical matter, that isn't correct, but the fact is, with the newer cameras, I mean, I do them all the time, and that's not a nightly thing. You do a set for the right exposure, the right temperature, the right gain, and so on, and you can use it for months or longer.
Excellent, thank you.
But figure out a way. I was looking at some of my old images from like the first few months I was doing this, and I was so proud of myself, and the data is ghastly. I was using a t-shirt to take flats, and I had these big rings and vignetting, and the pictures were terrible.
Good question. Other questions?
I have a question.
Hey, Paul Lorenz, please mute your computer. Here you go.
I have a question if I could ask. I've just recently started working with a 11-inch Celestron Edge HD, and my question relates to the back focus, or the distance that you're supposed to have from the back of the scope to the chip. And everything I can find says 146 millimeters is about the right distance, but what I've been coming up with is closer to like 167, and I'm wondering what I'm doing wrong. And the problem is I have an off-axis guider in the train, and so I get the main camera focused. I'm unable to get the off-axis guider focused, and I'm only messed around with it because of the weather. I've really only had about a night and a half to play with it. And so I'm just curious if anybody else has experience with the C11, and is the 146 millimeters that I'm reading about incorrect, or, and then as a broader question, I guess just the focusing distance from your telescope to your chip, and how do people go about calculating and measuring and getting that correct?
Anybody? Well, I have a C11, but I think it's not unusual that the uh, the back focus that you actually achieve when you start getting down to focusing many times doesn't match up with what you see the manufacturer's specs say. So I wouldn't be surprised that what maybe I don't know what the F ratio of that scope is, but if it's off by just a small bit, that can make a significant difference in the back focus. So I wouldn't be terribly concerned about that. You probably want more back focus than less anyway, right? With a off-axis guider.
Mm-hmm.
For the off-axis guider, probably the only thing you can do is try to add some extension rings that screw onto the, depending on what kind of a guide scope you have. Some of them, the 1.25 inch ones, many times will have a threaded front end, and you can get a little extension ring to screw on to get it further out. Many times that's the case, that when you get the main camera in focus, to get the off-axis guider or a reticle eyepiece on a flip mirror to come into focus, you have to get the eyepiece or the guider back further or further away from the image train. Those would be two things you could try.
Okay. Well, thank you.
All right, good luck. Anything else? Two good questions. All right. Well, if you were around last month, you got to hear part one of Jeff's introduction to the advanced sequencer in Nina. And tonight he's going to dazzle us with some of the more esoteric approaches to using the advanced sequencer. So if you're ready, Jeff, feel free to take over and lead us.
All right. So if you weren't here last month, or if you don't have a photographic memory to remember everything we talked about last month, I want to review quickly what we did go over. So first of all, a sequence is the answer to a question. And the question is, what commands do I need to give my rig to run it from start to finish through the night? So here's my rig, and from the position, you can see the reflection of the mountains in the window there. The scope is close to my house, and much of the western sky is blocked, 45 to 50 degrees up. So that means my typical routine is pick up a target. I like to be above 30 degrees in the east, run it until I lose it, and then pick up a second target for the evening. So my sequence is going to have, as a rule, 2 targets. Got a refractor, filter wheel, camera, Pegasus power box, guide scope, guide camera. The autofocuser is on the other side of the telescope, so you can't see it, but it's there. So those are the tools that I have, all of which can be controlled, including the switch within the power box, although I rarely use that. All can be controlled within Nina. Now, what we talked about, you're seeing, I trust, 2 sequences side by side now? Okay, thank you. This is the sequence that we talked about last month. I've been using sequencer power-ups for a couple of years now. I created a version of one of my recent sequences, but I took all the power-ups out of it, and that's what we went over. So to review what I use within Nina, as we discussed, there are a variety of plugins available. It's a long list here, goes on and on and on and on. Here are the ones I've installed. The ones that I consider the most important, the astrophysics related ones for my mount. The Hocus Focus is an enhanced way of running your autofocuser. I've become a big fan of Night Summary, and we talked about that at a little more length last month. It gives you loads of data about your run, how efficient you were. And then here, sequencer power-ups. I also use Ground Station, which is a way that the system can send me messages. I use the free tool. Maybe it's not free, but it's cheap. Pushover, so I can get messages on my phone that say a variety of things, and we looked at some of those. So that's the rig. Those are the plugins. Here's the sequence, and just to remind you, a sequence is divided into 3 areas. Imagine taking out all these black rectangles. You've got one area from here up. That's the start section. And you can put a set of starting related commands there. The middle section is your imaging section. And the final section is your closing section. So in fact, this is in the wrong place. This should be down here. Because this is my end of sequence. So I like the metaphor that and it looks even better this way, of a hamburger. Here's the top bun up here, here's the bottom bun, and here's the meat of the evening. And within each of these, and these are called containers. Notice the little box here, these for container. These are instruction sets, which have been copied into this template. So here's my startup instructions, and all these little red warnings are because there's no equipment connected, because I'm running this on my PC, not live. But for Keith's benefit, I do have a live version running with the telescope in the garage if we need to look at something live. So I've got a startup sequence. Each target has its own container. Here's my first target. And then I was actually working on a mosaic. Conrad and I were talking about mosaics earlier. And this was panel 1. And Conrad, as you'll find, laying out mosaics is very easy in Nina. It'll just give you 2 separate targets which overlap slightly to create the mosaic. I take my flats at dawn. I forgot to mention, I do have a Deep Sky Dad cover flat panel on the front of the scope now. So at astronomical dawn, it closes up, the light comes on, and while the light starts to come up outside, it takes all my flats. And then I have a sequence for shutting everything down, putting everything back into a parked neutral position. The theme that we went over last month is that I've set up this sequence as a menu, probably best seen here. So within any given target, there is a container for preparing the target, slewing, center, rotate, autofocus. And then I have a show imaging box and an LRGB imaging box. I also have one just for stars, which I take at a shorter exposure. And some of my sequences will use that. So when I plan out my evening, I open up each of these target containers. This was a section of Virgo M90 to M60. Not going to shoot that in show, so I would turn it off like that. Then I'd go into the LRGB and I would adjust all my settings here, particularly looping for a particular amount of time. Loop until time means it's going to run these instructions serially until, in this case, 11:42 p.m. And you can set this to astronomical dawn. You can set it to whatever you like. I set this for when I want this to end. Usually, as I said, it's when the target is getting close to my roof. And then I go on to the second target, which looks exactly the same. Now, a mosaic of M16 and 17 is likely going to be a show target. And so I would, in this case, I have RGB stars only, but say for tonight, I would be turning that off. So I'm toggling things on and off, and I'm manually adjusting individual commands within the sequence. When that's all ready, I click the run button down here, and I'm off to the races. So what we're looking at here is a long series of steps, some with conditional loops like this loop until time. What we're going to talk about tonight is sequencer power-ups. And I want to put this all back so that we can look at these two images side by side. This is the same sequence with the power-ups commands I use. Now, before we get into the details of it, I want to talk about a question that Keith raised, power-ups and sequencer plus. Power-ups were introduced by a guy named Mark Blank about 3-4 years ago. He has abandoned power-ups. The plugin is no longer available within Nina. His GitHub page is down. His help page is down. Much of the core of what power-ups can do, or some of it, is being incorporated into Nina version 3.3. In the meantime, another team has taken over power-ups. They cloned it. They call it Sequencer Plus. It's exactly the same functionality, same set of commands. I actually checked the list one by one so that you don't have to. But it's designed to be forward compatible for Nina 3.3, which is currently in development. It's in nightlies now, which means it's risky to use for regular imaging runs. They haven't released a beta yet. 3.3 is supposed to be released sometime in 2027. So I would use 3.3 at your own risk. If you have 3.2, which is what I'm running, and you downloaded sequencer power-ups a couple of years ago, Nina doesn't take that away from you. If I were to fry my computer and reinstall 3.2, I could not get power-ups anymore. So don't hesitate to use Sequencer Plus. Now, when I say power-ups, just hear in your mind that I'm saying power-ups or Sequencer Plus. Same thing. All right, now let's get into it. What are power-ups? Power-ups are instructions that allow the use of defined constants that you define, variables, which can include device data, live device data, formulae, pretty much whatever you want, and expressions. Expressions can be mathematical expressions. They can be text expressions. They can use constants, variables, and live data. They also include logical capabilities that the regular advanced sequencer does not have. And we're going to look at a couple of examples of that. When I say logic, the three main ones are an if command. If blank happens, You then get to specify what the consequences are. If fails is another command. So take, for example, running an autofocus. So if your autofocus fails, well, what do you want to happen? Maybe you try it again. Maybe you wait for a while, then try it again, and send a notice to yourself saying there's a problem with autofocus. And after 6 tries over a period of 45 minutes, maybe you just abort the sequence and go to the shutdown part of the sequence. Whatever you want. It's completely to your discretion. There's another one, if then else. So it gives you a 2-pronged branch. If X happens, then follow the first branch. If it doesn't happen, then follow the second branch. Expressions and variables are evaluated each time they come up during runtime. So if you're in a loop, like we were looking at my loop for exposures, if there are variables or expressions in there, Nina is going to reevaluate them every time. So for example, one of the bits of device data you can use is just temperature. So you could define a variable calling it temperature. And then you can say if temperature is plus or minus 2 degrees, run an autofocus, something like that. I have something like that in my sequences, but I don't use a variable. Visually, when you look at, let me get this thing out of the way here. When you look at power-ups or sequencer plus, the enhanced instructions all have a plus sign after them. These are all commands that exist in the regular sequencer. Annotation, cool camera, they're all over the place. I mean, here's cool camera for the camera in the regular advanced sequencer. Here's cool camera plus. And that means you can insert the items that I've mentioned. So not all of them take constants and variables and expressions. Some of them will only take something. For example, cool your camera is going to require a number. It might be a constant. I don't change my camera temperature through the course of the night. It could be a formula that results in a number, but it wouldn't accept a text field because it can't use that. So when we look at these two sequences side by side, bearing in mind that they're the same, let's talk about the differences a little bit. First of all, we have some global variables. No such counterpart over here. One of the few significant elements of the 3 sections of the hamburger is that the scope of each of these sections is independent. If I put a variable into the startup section, a regular variable, and define it, and then I try to use it in the imaging section, it won't work. A variable placed in the startup section is only going to work in the startup section. A variable placed, and there's more nuance that we'll get into in a minute, but in general, variables placed in each of these sections do not affect other sections unless you use global variable. So here I've defined 2 global variables. When you drag the command from here, there's no name and there's nothing in the initially box. So I've defined this. I have AF start, which I know this time of year, my autofocus needs to go to about a little over 15,000 to get within range for the autofocus to run accurately. So that's my starting position. And I have a global variable for autofocus count, which is set to 0. And there are places within the sequence that will toggle it upward. So this is before I had night summary and I wanted to know how many times my autofocus ran. I had it send me a report. So you've got some additional things you can put up in the global, up in the start section. And then these global variables will work in all three. I wouldn't say will. They're supposed to work in all three sections. I have had some problems with that. Now, the next thing you see here we have a startup template, my summer 25 startup and equipment check. When you drag a template, and I've got many listed here, over to the sequence, it's a copy and paste. So everything in here, most of this is in the template, but it's all copied into this sequence. I can revise this to my heart's content and save it, and it will always be true for this sequence. Now, what's going on over here? Here I have a template by reference. This is a Power Up Sequencer Plus unique command. You insert a template name here. It doesn't copy and paste the entire template into your sequence. It calls it like a subroutine. So visually, these look about the same. Try to line them up about right. There are a few differences because I took out some of the other power-ups related things here. But what happens here is you save a template into the template section and you call it up. Now, if I decide that my starting position, so here's my command to move the focuser to my starting position, 15,200. If I decide tonight it needs to be 14.8, this will run fine. If I save the sequence without closing Nina and without closing the sequence, the 14.8 will persist. But when I close this at the end of the night, it will not persist because remember, template by reference is calling up the stored template. When I edit things here, I am not changing the stored template unless I click the save button here. Now, what does that get you? Imagine you have a handful of templates. Conrad, you're talking about running a mosaic, so maybe you've got a sequence for your mosaic, but you also have a couple more targets that you've worked on recently. You might want to come back to them next year. You might want to go back to them and pick them up again when your mosaic is done. If I am in the regular advanced sequencer, and we've already said I can make any changes I want and they will, and click save, and they will perpetuate in this sequence only. I can also click the save. This also has a save button. I can click this and it will save it. And then anytime I use that template in the future, it will incorporate my changes. What you won't get here is anything that affects past sequences. By using template for reference, anywhere that I use this template, past, present, future, will always start with the same template. So if I upgrade this template in a way that I want to be permanent, I will click the save button here. And then my sequences from last week and the week before and next week and the week after, as well as the sequence, will all have that change automatically. Now, that's very helpful. It has a drawback, and that is we talked about making little changes like 14,800, or I decide for my my slew location tonight, there are some clouds in the direct east, so I want to slew to the south, so I want to slew to 60 degrees altitude, but an azimuth of 180. I can do all these things on the fly. Remember, you can change Nina commands on the fly except the command that is being executed at the time. So you can change before they're executed. So I've made a couple of changes here. If I click save and I close this sequence and I reopen it, well, let's see what happens if I do that. I save it. I open another sequence. Now we go back to the original sequence and I open up. Notice this is back to 15,200. And my azimuth is back to 80 degrees. So if you're running a sequence for a week, because you get a nice run in November of 5 clear nights in a row, you're going to have to keep going back and doing these little night by night changes, the ones that don't warrant a permanent change. You got to do it every time. So important thing to remember about how the template works. Now, one other thing I want to show you, we talked last time about night summary, which I highly recommend as a way of collecting information. Notice I have night summary kicking off right up here at the start of the night. Maybe I decide, I really don't want night summary running until after I've done all my startup configuration, because I don't want it the time it spends building a model autofocusing to count against its calculation of yield. So let's say I take night summary and I put it down here at the very end of my startup. Now I save. And now again, if we close, oops, don't use that one. And we reopen. Now, how did I do that? I clicked save. Oh, I clicked save, but until I close Nina and reopen, it has read the templates already and it's loaded them into memory. So I've actually made this change where I've dragged this down here, but I would have to close Nina and reopen it for this to appear down here. So one other thing to remember, all the templates, all your targets get loaded up at the start of the session. All right, now I want to go back to the picture of just looking at these side by side. Let's look at the next thing that is different between the two sequences. There's something called a constant variable container, another Sequencer Plus tool that has no counterpart in the advanced sequencer. As you might imagine, a constant variable container allows you to add constants and variables. So can you guys read the text here? Is that legible?
Yes.
So just to go through some of these, what I've done is I've created constants for pretty much all of the parameters that are used in the exposure section. So I have RGB gain, NB count, L count for luminance, RGB count, NB exposure time, luminance exposure time, RGB exposure time, L dither, RGB dither, NB dither. I set these once right here. And then you go back and look at the imaging section of this sequence over here. We have exposure time, binning, gain, offset, dithering. If I want to change this and use 240 seconds and a gain of 0, each one of these has to be changed manually. By making them constants, and using the corresponding, in this case, it's called Smart Exposure Plus, instead of having for time 360 seconds, I put in a constant called NB exposure time. And it will automatically show me, let's go here. It shows me in green what the value is. So here's NB count, NB exposure time, NB gain, NB dither. And if I want to change narrowband count from 3 to 1, I make the change here one time. And now everywhere in my sequence that uses the constant NB count, it's automatically changed for me. This is a much more, I think the polite way to put it is idiot-proof way, for me anyway, of adjusting these parameters. I don't have any variables in here at this time, but we're going to look at one in a different sequence a little bit later on. Now, these last constants in here, I'll just describe the feature. The regular sequencer has a command called subframe exposure, which allows you to set a region of interest as a percentage of your field of view. I was not confident if I set it to say 66% that every frame and my flats would start with exactly the same pixel in the top left-hand corner so that my darks and everything would calibrate properly. I might have been overthinking that. Somebody can tell me when we get to the Q&A. But what I did is I worked out, now in Sequencer Plus or Power-Ups, you have a much more powerful ability to create a subframe. You can draw with parameters left, top, width, and height. You can draw a box anywhere in your field of view. It need not be centered. This, if you did the math, and I learned how to do this from Alan Rockowitz, you might recognize the width and height values of 6248 and 4176. I run the 6200. This gives me the parameters to create a 2600 size frame directly in the center of my field of view, and knowing that I have exactly the same pixel in the corner, in the top left corner, every single frame. So another example of something that Power-Ups can do that the regular advanced sequencer cannot. Now, I mentioned earlier, constants and variables are used in particular areas. They have what the manual calls block scope. If I put a variable inside the M90 container, it will not work in the M16 panel 1 container. Now, I haven't figured out a reason why I would want to use different variables and constants in each of these containers, but it gives you that flexibility. On the other hand, if you want to use constants and variables, you place, throughout your entire imaging section, you place your constant variable container at the top of the imaging section. And if you do that, then it treats this container as if it were the parent of all the containers in imaging that follow it. So imagine, you notice that this container has a border that goes down like this and closes out here. Within this container, there are other containers. There's the prepare target container. There's the show imaging container. There's the LRGB container. These subordinate containers would accept a constant that I put at the top of the target container. But by putting everything up here, I never have to worry about exactly where these lines are. But it's critically important that you bear this in mind. Now, constants and variables in the container do not apply to the startup section. And that's why if you want constants or variables in startup, you got to put them up here manually. Now, you might ask, Jeff, you created a global variable AF start and you gave it a value of 15,200. But then you go right in here to your move focuser command and you didn't use the move focuser plus command, which would have allowed me to type AF start. Here, notice I get an error, a red box. I didn't do that because this is the only place that I need this number. So I figure it just adds complexity to have a variable here and a command here when I can just insert it in the command. I'm going to save why I created the autofocus start. It was an attempt to solve a problem I used to have when my focuser was slipping a little bit. And I tried to create a troubleshooting system for it that never quite worked right. But we can save that for another day. Now, I want to talk about the logic a little bit and the if command. Let's look at prepare target in the two sequences. So preparing a target in the regular sequence is slew and center, start guiding. Maybe there's an autofocus command here, depending on how much time has elapsed since the last autofocus. Let's look at what I've got here now with power-ups. I'm using the if failed command. The command to be tested for failure is run autofocus. Now, what happens? Let's go back up here for a second. Here's the run autofocus command from startup. What options do I have? I can set the number of attempts, and I can specify what happens if the autofocus fails. Continue, skip the current instruction set, which means it's going to jump into the imaging section. I can abort completely, which just stops everything, or I can skip to the end of sequence instructions, park the mount, warm the camera, run the focuser back in, and call it a night. Those are the only options that you get within the native run autofocus command. So I have the same ones here. Number of attempts, what happens on error. But I have more. What happens if the autofocus fails after 3 attempts? Well, I'm going to wait for 20 minutes. Maybe it's clouds. If that fails, notice I'm nesting one of these commands inside another. Then we're going to send a message via ground station which says target lost. And this is a variable. Actually, this is the only variable that you have in the regular advanced sequencer. The same kinds of variables, target name, camera temperature, and the like that you may use in your naming convention for your images, you can use that in a message. So this is going to say M90 to M60 could not be acquired. Sequence will now end. And if I've done this right, okay, I did that wrong. This should be skip to end of sequence instructions. So it gives you, every command I've got in here was because I had a problem and this was my attempt at solving it. But it's an example of how you can use logic to perhaps get the system to right itself. As a reminder, for those of you who weren't here last month, I'm a big believer in sleep. And once I get the rig up and running and the first images are underway, I go to bed. So I am trusting the system to try to solve problems itself as much as possible. Now, what happens here if it doesn't fail? If it doesn't fail, the autofocus then completes successfully. It goes on to the next command. And this is the other variable command. You can define a variable and you can set a variable. So here I set the variable AF count to a new value, which is AF count plus 1. And then we send a message to pushover, which says preparatory autofocus is done. The autofocus count is now, and it reports 1 because it's added the 1 to the 0 from before. And I had originally intended this to iterate all through the night. So at the end of the night, I'd see I had 6 or 9, whatever autofocuses. I have a tendency to focus too often. And this has now been replaced by the night summary, which just captures all that data for me without me having to do a thing. I'm going to show you another, in a moment, another way of using variables. But before I do that, let me mention a couple of other noteworthy power-ups. They're here in the miscellaneous power-ups section. Well, there's 2 of them. First, there's do-it-yourself meridian trigger, or meridian flip trigger. Native in Nina, you have 2 parameters you can set. Time before meridian and time after meridian. So when do you open the meridian flip window? When does it close? Everything else happens under the hood. On the do-it-yourself meridian flip trigger, and we can open it up here, it breaks all the steps out separately so that you can customize them as you wish for your rig. You can wait to pass the meridian. You can add time delays to let the mount settle down. You can add, normally this would have an autofocus in it. I have a refractor. I have no mirror flop or anything like that. I don't need to autofocus simply because a meridian flip has occurred. So I've taken that out. But you can customize this to fit your needs. Other interesting flips, power-ups. Suppose you're sitting there watching your imaging screen and you see your HFR climbing and climbing, and your parameters are set up so it's not going to autofocus for 10 more frames. You can take this autofocus trigger and drop it into the live section under triggers. And as soon as the previous command completes, it'll run an autofocus. You have a do-it-yourself trigger. So you put the trigger in here, and now you define what happens. What's the trigger and what follows from the trigger. So completely at your discretion. Here's where template by reference is. And here's another of my personal favorites. Wait indefinitely. Now, when I go back over here, when I go out, I run the autofocus. I cool everything down, set the focuser, run autofocus. Then I need to go out on most nights, do my polar alignment, and manually rotate the camera to set it for the night. I've put in a 30-minute delay here. That's more than I, God willing, ever need. But wouldn't it be nice to just have something that says wait indefinitely, which if you look here, you'll see it. When wait indefinitely is executed, a little red box appears that says stop or end, I forget which. But the sequence is going to sit here until you click the box. So it gives me however much time I need to complete my tasks. So that's a personal favorite. Let me now go over to the live. So let me pause here for a second. Any questions about what I've said so far?
Yeah, Jeff, I have a question. When you're using those constants, where do you type that constant in to, or is the constant named based on what's in the sequence command?
But you have to you define those terms and you have to make sure they match. Now, you can set constants in two places. On the options page for sequencer power-ups, and the same thing exists for the sequencer plus. I've set some constants here. The other place to set them is in the container, or you can drop them manually throughout the sequence. But what I did is, and when you start with a new constant, there's no name and there's no value. You define the name, you define the value. Then when you go into your sequence, you've got to make sure you put that same name in the appropriate place. So we had, you remember, so NB count. If I type this, if I do a typo and put a G there, I get an error message. There's no constant to find.
So you only have to put it in that one time?
Yep. Well, you got to put it in each place you want to use it.
Oh.
Here I'm using it 3 times.
Okay.
And
so you created that name and then you put that name in this command.
Exactly.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, so I'm going to jump over to a different sequence. So I mentioned at our last session right before Father's Day that I was hoping to buy a rotator then, and indeed I did. So I've been working in the garage. I've not had the thing out under the sky, but I was faced with the question, all right, how am I going to take flats with a rotator? The simplest case is rotate to a target, shoot the target, take some flats. Rotate to your second target, shoot the target, take some flats. The problem with that is I'm using dark sky time to take flats, and I didn't want to do that. So I thought, all right, how can I define parameters so that I can capture, so my sequence changes to target 1, imaging, target 2, imaging, leave the rotation where it is, target 2 flats, rotate back to target 1 rotation, take target 1 flats. And the way I figured out how to do that is I created 2 variables. I'm calling them target 1 angle and target 2 angle. Now, for each target, notice what happens when I slew to the target. First of all, slew and center is gone, and it's replaced with slew, center, and rotate. And Nina will use the plate solving to determine the camera rotation and set it appropriately. Once that is done, I set a variable. So remember, target one angle was set to 0 for starters, but the new value, and I'm taking this, I wanted to have the live telescope set up. When you mouse over this little circle eye, it shows you all the live data that you can use in your variables and expressions, one of which is rotator position, which happens to be at 90 degrees at the moment. If it rotates to 25 degrees for this target, it'll set this variable to 25. Now we run autofocus, we start guiding, we take pictures. Do the same thing with the second target when there's going to be a different rotation. So here, let's see, we have a rotation of 205 degrees. And oops, wrong one, sorry. For the second target, the rotation is 135 degrees. So it will save those two numbers. Now we get down to my trained flats section. I've put in the command to rotate back to the target 2 angle just in case it's moved for some reason. It shouldn't, but belt and suspenders. And it takes a set of flats. Then it rotates to the target 1 angle and takes a set of flats. And if one of these is an LRGB target, I can turn off these 3 filters, and if the other one's a show filter, show only, I can cherry pick what I need for each of these flats. So I have tested this with the simulators in Nina. I have tested it just running in my garage, where I said, rotate here, wait a minute, rotate there, wait a minute, and I made sure that it captured the variables the way I anticipated, and it seems to work. So stay tuned to see if that actually does ultimately work. So to close up, I continue to recommend that you start with the Patriot Astro templates, though I would caution you that he created a million variations that I could never keep track of. So I basically have one template with my menu instead of having a LRGB rotated template and an LRGB non-rotated template, and so on. Make your changes to your sequences slowly and test them. The fewer changes you make at a time, the easier it will be to troubleshoot if something goes wrong. Once you have a template that works, copy it and use it as your next template. Change the target, customize it from there. But I strive, as I've told you, to have this be this entire sequence is my pre-flight checklist. And I go through it line by line, make sure I'm happy with everything. Bear in mind, you can use the simulators. There are simulators for some equipment, not all, but it will at least, if there's a really obvious error, it will flag it. Now, whenever you teach something, you have to go back and really make sure you understand it. Preparing the session has taught me I've got some barnacles in my sequence. I've got some things I don't use anymore. They were put in there for a reason that was good at the time. It's no longer valid. I haven't taken them out yet. In part, I am of the view, if I have a sequence that ain't broke, don't fix it. But it would probably be beneficial to take out the things that are no longer relevant. It'd be easier visually. One thing I'm considering doing, I do have a tendency, if I'm in a hurry, to miss something in the pre-flight checklist. Most commonly, I will screw up the loop until time command. So my show default is astronomical dawn. I need to change this if I have a second target after it to a set time so that it'll go on to the second target. I've missed this a few times, and then I wind up taking pictures of my house for a while. I'm considering using the annotation command. Annotation is just a line in the sequence with some text. And titling them all in capital letters, remove before flight, : remember to set end of time. And my plan would be that I would go through looking for those annotations. I would do what the annotation says. Then I would delete the annotation. Here is the beauty of template by reference. The annotations will be in the template by reference. And so I'll delete them all and I'll run my sequence. But when I open up the sequence the next night, they're all going to be back because they're part of the saved sequence. The other thing I'm thinking about doing that I can show you here would be to add, when I do my flats, I have to go through manually and I have to toggle off, okay, that I don't need that one, I don't need that one, and so on. It occurred to me I could use, got to go back over here. I could use constants of either 0 or 1 and an if command. So say I have a constant called L used, luminance filter used. If I go through my constant and variable container, and here you see L used is 1. That means true in the logic of Nina. So when I get down here, it says, okay, you use luminance. If the luminance filter is used, now take the trained flat exposure. If I don't use the luminance for this target, I would just change this to 0, and not 0, 1, 0. And now this is false. The command will not be executed. I might put that in. You could also use an if command for show imaging in target 1, LRGB imaging in target 1. And I wouldn't have to worry about turning these things on and off as I do now. I could basically put more of my menu work up in this section. I'm thinking about it. I think it may make sense to do it in some cases where it will idiot-proof the system. It may not be worthwhile in some others. So that's Sequencer Plus and Sequencer Power-Ups. And I will turn command of the screen back over to Greg, and again, happy to answer any final questions.
Any questions for Jeff?
Or is anyone still awake?
I have a couple of questions, Jeff. Seems like a lot of the power of the power-ups would be helpful for tracking errors and helping you figure out what to do next. So is there a way for any of the where you create your own trigger to actually look at the results of a particular image? For example, let's say the HFR of a particular image. If the HFR that's been going along changes by more than 20% or something, you suspect the clouds have moved in or something like that. Is that possible?
You can absolutely use parameters like HFR, FWHM as triggers.
So you could do that.
My question, though, I guess you could pause the sequence and send a message saying, hey, go look at your imaging screen at the last image. I don't know of a way to display an image within the sequence itself. But you could stop everything. And, if you're like our friend Doug Summers, Doug keeps his alarms on. If something goes wrong in the middle of the night, he's up and outside. You get an alarm like that, you go check it out.
Yeah, I was thinking, I had an issue the other night where a cable was dragging and all of a sudden the HFR went up because all the stars were like double and triple. And it's an obvious mechanical problem, but it triggered an autofocus instead of saying you've got a dragging cable. So
Yeah, it won't tell you got a dragging cable, but you could absolutely have a trigger. You could pause the sequence and send yourself a message. And I don't use the feature in pushover, but pushover can send you tones in a variety, like different ringtones. It can have an emergency alert where it's loud to wake you up. And then you can go find your dragging cable.
other questions? All right. Well, Jeff, I think.
Alan, critical commentary.
No commentary other than it's important to note that there are many different ways to do everything.
Absolutely right. And the one that works for you is the right one for you.
Yeah.
Correct. So, I think it's important to note that you were explaining how you do it, but everybody could do it differently and it could still work fine.
Absolutely.
So if you're a crappy programmer like me, you just force it and it works. Now, I remember the good old days when I was taking calculus in college and my teacher wrote not elegant -1. And it was right.
Yeah, but you got the answer right.
I got the answer right, but I lost the point because I was not elegant. Because I brute forced my way through it. So you can do that still.
Well, the more you try for sophistication and elegance, the more you risk something not working, and then it slows you down by a little bit of time or by a lot of time to figure out where the error is.
For sure. And everything can look like it's going to work fine and it doesn't work. And then the next day you look at it and you go, well, obviously it's not going to work. So that's been my experience anyway with programming for this and other stuff. But other than that, I think you laid out exactly what it does and you did a great job showing everybody how you do it. So I have no comments other than that. So let me mute myself.
Okay, any other questions for Jeff?
Hey, Jeff, I have one just general Nina question, if I may.
Sure.
If I set the parameter to cool the camera, say to -10°C, and it's hot outside, and my camera can't reach -10°C, will that stop the sequence?
No, not by itself. You'll get an error message saying camera couldn't achieve temperature, but it'll be at 0 or maybe -5, and it'll keep going. Now
Okay, thanks. I could have
power-ups,
tested that, but save me some time.
no, it's happened to me where you'll get a warning, but I believe the sequence will continue.
Okay.
It will.
It would be easy enough in power-ups or sequencer plus to have a failure command. If cool temp has an error message, then wait, send a message that something's gone wrong. I suppose, if you had a couple of different variables set for temperatures, I have my cool winter, which is -15, cool summer is 0. And I had to create one called cool scorch at +5 because I had one night I couldn't get it to 0. So I think you could toggle. If it fails to get to the lower one, you could have a fallback temperature. So it would be, it failed. So now you set the camera to cool to your fallback temperature and maybe send you a message. I'm a big fan of messages. At least, not that I'm awake during the night to see them. Of course, cooling, you're probably seeing early in the evening. But I like to get that list of messages that's come in from ground station through the night when I wake up in the morning. If something goes wrong, if there's an error, I automatically get an alert of an error. And I'll get, it's kind of got a pink or red background. Something wrong here. Usually it has to do with autofocus in my case.
Okay. Well, in my connector, when I start, I automatically cool to -10. And so before I ever start the sequence, the camera's cooled down anyway. So I should know, but I do have it in my startup to cool to -10, but I've had it fail. So I didn't remember if it completely killed the sequence or if it was something else. I didn't know.
Yeah, I think I've stopped it because if I'm planning to use darks at -15 and the camera goes to -7, I don't have darks. I know you can scale darks, but
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff. That was a in-depth look at the advanced sequencer. Our next meeting in August will be the third Monday, which is August the 17th. And again, if you have images that you'd like to share in the Desert Sky Bulletin, you can send those to me, or you can just tell me it's okay to use the images I post on the TAA forum to use in the bulletin, and I will automatically consider that permission.
I did send you a couple.
Yeah, I have received those, and I think some of those made it into the bulletin last month. And thank you. Please try to keep the size of the image you send under 10 megabytes. That makes it easier for it to be incorporated into the bulletin. Okay, thank you very much. And if that's all we're going to scare for tonight, I'll call this the end of the meeting.
Thanks, Jeff.
Welcome. Good night, all.
Good night.